Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York City baritone saxophonist Jason Marshall. He arrived in New York City in 2003 and hit the ground running. He developed a style that encompassed the whole of African American music and studied with some fine names like Hamiett Bluiett, Ronnie and the great Gary Smulyan. He would move on to play with the best in the business like Roy Hargrove and so many others. He explains his past, his current life now, and the hopeful future. Enjoy this story.
So, the baritone sax, that's like the home of swimmer's lungs, correct?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I didn't grow up thinking of it like that, but I am an endurance athlete, and it does help. So, swimmer's lungs. I mean, I run, I race bicycles. I swim, but I don't swim competitively because I'm not old enough to be a triathlete yet, but one day soon.
Right on. Yeah, I was talking to a cat a little while back during the pandemic, and he caught COVID very, very early on and was a saxophone player, and it just really didn't, have a fighting chance because his lungs were so strong, and I thought about that from, the perspective of, horn players are going to have a better natural defense against it, but at any rate, I ran into your music on Downbeat. I've been very interested in what you're doing. So first and foremost, thanks for taking a minute out. And, speaking of COVID and being in a very particular time on the planet right now, talk to me a little bit about projects and what you've been up to, how you've been coping since March of 2020.
What I've been doing mostly is trying to focus on things that I never had time to focus on. Learning birdwood strings, for instance, taking up a new woodwind instrument. This time it's been the bassoon. Projects like trying to not get rusty completely from lack of rhythm. I mean, there was a time when, folks were applying for different grants and things, and I had to count out how many gigs I averaged a month. And I averaged 28 gigs a month. And so then it became, so I'm missing this much work, but I'm also missing this much time with the instrument to my face. So then it's about how many of those hours can I make up for alone, just practicing. So, just trying to, uphold the craft and still be, in the religious sense, a practicing musician. Just trying to stay ready because none of us know when things will change. But the readiness is what the vocation calls for right now.
I guess that's the one thing I've heard resoundingly from musicians is this pause in the planet has given everybody kind of time to look at things that they didn't get a chance to get around to because life moves so fast, and it's like we've had this self-imposed exile, so to speak. So, I'm curious where you grew up, born and raised, and kind of how not only the baritone became your instrument, but how did the roots of jazz take hold in you?
So, I'm from what we now call the DMV. Born in Washington, D.C., raised in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I was really fortunate because we had a very, very strong music scene, both in the education system and outside of it. I took piano lessons, probably first. My first music teacher was a piano teacher. My first music teacher was my mother because she sang to me every day for 18 years. But outside of the home, my first music teacher was a piano player, and then in the end of third grade, in Montgomery County Public Schools, we got introduced to instrumental music. Before that, we had rhythm section and glockenspiel and recorder and that kind of thing in kind of general music class. But at the end of third grade, we all got to watch a demonstration of all the instruments, and then over the summer between third and fourth, you decided what instrument you were going to play, or you joined the chorus. So I picked saxophone, and that's how I started it. So fourth grade on, that's what I did. And then, DC in the 80s and 90s was a very vibrant I'd call it a quite Afrocentric community at that time. And so jazz, so-called, I mean, the word jazz was not so common, but the music was everywhere. And so we had it on the radio. The handful of TV shows I could watch at that time were, let me see, The Cosby Show, Different World, Sesame Street, Bet on Jazz. No, it wasn't. Bet on Jazz was later because we didn't have cable in the beginning. But, but everything I could see had jazz on it. And so that was, Fat Albert. I mean, those kinds of things all had what we call jazz on it. And so it was always around. So if you played music, between jazz, R&B, go-go, some gospel music, you were going to play the music that you were hearing. And that was certainly around. WPFW on the radio, WHUR at Howard. All of that was around. Jazz Times Magazine was around, because they were based in Maryland. I used to be an intern there. So it was all around me. The military bands gave free concerts every weekend in the parks. So we got exposed to music that way. What am I trying to say? Montgomery County Community College had summer jazz camp. Paul Carr had a jazz camp. Still runs a jazz camp. Yeah. So we had jazz music camps every summer. There was the DC Youth Orchestra. Like I said, Paul Carr ran a jazz camp. Montgomery County Community College had a jazz camp. I remember Jamie Abersol coming to town doing a jazz camp. Like I said, the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, that was a good time to be a young person trying to be in music in the DMV. So I was just a product of that.
Right on. Talk to me a little bit about the first live jazz show you saw that just blew you away, that made you think, man, that's where I want to be.
The first live jazz show. I'm sure that the first one I saw was before the one I'm going to mention. But again, there was so much of it around. Before I even played an instrument, I saw one. And it was not unremarkable, but I understood at that point that that's what happened in the community. The first concert that I went to that made me want to be a professional musician, I saw the Charles Mingus Big Band at the Kennedy Center. And I was already playing and trying to learn how to play in school and so forth. But I got to see the Mingus Big Band. I think it was 1990, it was either 98 or 99. And I saw them at the Kennedy Center, and I saw Ronnie Cuber on the baritone. And I'd heard him, but seeing him in person and just being privy to that level of, musical velocity, that kind of sealed the deal for me. So I said, whatever I have to do, that's what I want to do. And like I said, if that was 1999, I was able to start working with the Charles Mingus Big Band in 2004. And I've been doing it since then.
Right on. Well, I know your mom was a huge influence on you.
Absolutely.
Talk to me a little bit more about mentors. Who were big in your lives, like voices that still resonate in your head?
Yeah. Well, first of all, my father and my mother, even now. I was blessed to have two really, really supportive parents that, they always went the extra mile to make sure that I could play music. I had really supportive grandparents. I come from a real supportive system and network. So, I'm starting this by saying the hardest part is for me to try and mention everyone or not try and mention everyone because I had so many people, but first of all, my parents and my grandparents. I had mentors like certainly Paul Carr. Lorenz Wheatley was my first regular saxophone teacher, and he's one of the people that really taught me how to listen to music actively rather than just hearing it. My favorite record is Cannonball Adderley's Something Else, and that's the one that Mr. Wheatley turned me on to when I was in high school. Lorenz Wheatley, Paul Carr, Fred Foss. Later on, Bruce Williams is still a mentor for me. And I studied with Ronnie Cuber and Gary Smulyan and Hamiett Bluiett. Oliver Lake. All of these folks took time to help me develop a broader understanding of the instrument and the music. One of the first gigs I did in New York was with Art Harper, and he showed me a lot about playing in a small group and just how to managing the business of music. Roy Hargrove, I spent 15 years with him, and whether he meant to or not, he taught me a whole lot of what I know now. So I was blessed because I had a lot of people: Cecil Brooks, Howard Johnson, Reggie Workman, Bertha Hope, Charlie Persip, Mark Gross, Brad Lely. I mean, I could be all day talking about folks that mentored me because I realized in hindsight I was just so hungry to learn that I would seek out anybody. I would seek out anyone, and the folks that reach out to me are the folks that I still, I'm in contact with. Vincent Gardner was a mentor for me. Yeah, I mean, I regret that I am leaving some people out, but I'm trying to get in as many as possible.
I guess the idea here is that it really truly does take a village, and that's
yeah. And I am completely the product of the people who got me to this point. So I didn't grow off a tree like this. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. So, coming to New York City, you're obviously entering a whole new realm of life when you do that. What was it like when you actually got to New York in '03 and really started getting in there? What first big gig at a club? What was it like?
So the first gig I did was with Jason Linder at Fat Cat, and I don't think I've ever been less prepared for music than I was on that day. Because the music was just on it was much more complicated than anything I had ever seen. A lot of odd meters, a lot of really complicated rhythms and things like that. And I think Chris Carlick was the best. He's since retired, but he called me. He said, "Hey man, you're new in town. Jason Linder needs a baritone and bass clarinet for his big band. That Fat Cat, make the rehearsal and just be there." So I did, and I couldn't really hang, but that was my first gig. And people like Paul Carr, mentors of mine, teachers. Leon Anderson is another one who. What happened is, as I was going through college, folks would tell me, and even some before college, they say, you're already ready. So don't let anyone think you're not ready. You have more to learn, but you're already ready. And you won't even know how ready you are even now until years later. A lot of that, what I understood as ready to receive the information, because you gotta be in a state to even absorb it. And so being in New York, I didn't know any better than to go into the deep end. So I was going to every gig I could think of, anything that had a baritone. At the gig, I would go, anywhere I could afford to be, basically. And like the first big, gig, I would say, I remember getting a call from Alex Harding. He called me he said, I need you to put on a tuxedo and bring your baritone and a clarinet to the Rainbow Room. And it's on 5th Avenue and 50th Street. So I went, and it was the Cab Calloway Orchestra, and the tenor saxophone player was Bill Easley, and he's another mentor of mine. And so, and he was one of my heroes, and he's out of a lot of the organ trio kind of tenor tradition. And so that was one experience. The other experience, from being at jam sessions a lot, I got to meet Roy Hargrove through those scenes. Eventually, he heard me trying to learn how to play because I was still very young. But he heard where I was headed. And so he said, okay, I'm gonna call you one day. And he called me one day and left a message, and it was to go and play with RH Factor at the Hollywood Bowl. And at the time, all I cared about was how to be a bebopper. And so I didn't even know. I knew about Roy Hargrove for sure, but I didn't know he had a funk band, based on, Parliament and Cameo. But that's what he wanted me to do. So I borrowed the record from a roommate and transcribed the record on the airplane and got to California. And that was my first jazz festival. First jazz festival as a New Yorker. I had played other jazz festivals in D.C., and being from D.C. actually made the transition to New York a lot easier. So it wasn't quite the culture shock that it is for a lot of folks who move here. Because I was already used to being around, world-class musicians from just being in D.C. But getting to play with Roy at the Hollywood Bowl and seeing, kind of everyone, Herbie Hancock and Bill Cosby was the MC, and Jamie Foxx, was one of the sort of attendant celebrities, and just seeing, Wayne Shorter, and I remember Femi Kuti was one of the headliners. Just to kind of see everyone that I'd seen on TV and in the magazines in person. That was, the Hollywood Bowl in 2004 was the beginning of that. And then, so I played the one gig at the Hollywood Bowl, and not knowing any better, I hung out that night, and I overslept and missed my flight the next morning. So, I figured out, got my act together, got to the airport, made the flight. Everyone else made their flights. And I didn't hear from Roy for a year. Then his manager called me back. And said, hey, long story short, he said, I need you to leave on short notice. Can you do it? I said, yeah. He called me back. He said, I need you to go to the airport right now. And so I packed a bag and got my horn and went to the airport. And that was 2005. And that was the beginning of me, going on tour with Roy. And that lasted 15 years.
Beautiful. That's a great story, man. So, this year of self-reflection's probably been pretty major, obviously, for all of us. What did you learn about not only your love of music, but your love of this world of jazz that we call jazz? What did you learn about all of that?
That, we can talk about the music, but the music is an extension of people, and the people have to be acknowledged and looked after, and their stories have to be attended to, because the pandemic sort of just brought into sharper relief things that were already going on, and so without the people, there is no music. And, wellness is all we have, really. So we have to be well to do the music. We have to be well to go and see the music, health is all there is for me, is the take home. The music, so-called jazz, I don't use the word jazz that much because I learned it as just music. But that music, reflects the people, and we as a people are still very much in the middle of that experience that created jazz, that created hip hop, that created R&B, that created gospel, So it has made me get, sort of hyper focused on the African American experience, above all else, because we're still in the middle of it. It's not like Europe and the Baroque period. Like Europe has changed a lot. Western Europe has changed a lot. And the Baroque period is definitely over. Whereas the circumstances that created jazz and created the blues and created field hollers and created gospel music and created R&B, those things are still happening. So for me, that's been the biggest thing. Just really, really coming to terms with the fact that we still have all of the work to do.
So talk to me a little bit about the return to the stage. As the world starts opening up, vaccinations are spreading, things are starting to happen. When we do return in earnest, you're on stage, we're in the audience. What do you hope we all realize about the power of live music when this comes back?
Just that, it's one of the few reliable ways to remind us of our humanity. It's a necessity in a way that we didn't appreciate as a society before now. Playing, the handful of experiences I've been able to have playing in public, outside, almost every time somebody comes up to the band crying because they didn't realize how much they needed it. So for me, that's the thing, like live music, and particularly music that speaks to the American experience is a very critical necessity, and it has to be supported by any means necessary. It really does.
I agree, man. So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Who do I think I am? First of all, I'm my son's father and my father's son. First of all, I'm my wife's husband. I'm a family member in the literal sense, and then in the communal sense, I'm a member of a larger family. That's who I understand myself to be. And then to that point, music is just a way to add positive energy to the familial experience in a communal way. Music is a way to tell stories of my community. So it's just that, and my focus on my health is a way to do that job for as long as possible. If I'm one thing, it's a steward of the vocation and a member of the family.
Beautiful. I love that answer, man. Hey, thank you for getting back with me so quickly and being willing to do this on a turnkey here. And, man, it's been great to get to know you. I love the music. I'm looking forward to profiling you on Neon Jazz. Good luck with everything as we move forward.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Let them know they can find me at Jason Marshall Jazz on Instagram and on Facebook, and jasonmarshalljazz.com, where I got all my music and all of that. Okay?
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jason for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.